Hey guys, so we're going to start the next section for chapter 2. We're starting to get closer and closer to doing proofs in class. But before we do proofs, we have to have an idea of what properties can we use to prove different things, okay? So everything that you've learned up to this point in geometry and algebra, you have to now be able to say a property or a theorem that's going to back it up. So the first ones we're going to look at today are just algebraic properties. Just a reminder, make sure you're writing your notes down and you're not just listening to the video. Okay, if there's something along the way that you don't understand or you want me to explain differently, put a highlight next to it or a star or something. Okay, that way you remember to ask me tomorrow. So the first property we're going to go over is addition property, and you'll realize that, again, all of the stuff you've done, you just have to put a name to it. So when you're trying to figure out what property to use, you want to look at what operation do you use to solve it. So if I have an equation that looks like this, in order to solve it, I'm going to add 7 to both sides. And I'm going to get x equals 17, right? If we look at the property, we used addition to solve the equation, correct? So this is a situation where we would state the addition property. So subtraction property is going to be the same type of scenario. But in order to solve this equation, I have to subtract 7 from both sides, and I'm going to get x equals 3. Okay, and again, we look at the operation we used, and we use subtraction. Right, multiplication and division are a little easier, but kind of harder to understand because you can use either one. So if you can use multiplication, you can also use division and vice versa. It's just a matter of, do you want to work with fractions and are you comfortable with working with fractions? So multiplication property is what I would use when I have fractions already involved. So if I had an equation that looked like 1 over 4x equals 2. There are two different ways that I could solve this. Okay, the first way would be to multiply by 4 on both sides. So I would end up with x equals 8. Okay, or I could use the division property and I could divide by 1/4 on both sides. But if you plug that into a calculator, you're going to realize you're still going to get x equals 8 for your answer. Okay, so even though I solved it two different ways, it's just a matter of knowing, okay, which property did I use or which property do I want to use? In this situation, I would always use multiplication just because if I cannot work with fractions, I'm going to choose that. Okay, another place that you see the division property is in an example like 3x equals 21. In order to solve that, I'm going to divide by 3. So if you ever do that, that's where the division property comes into play. Okay, so that was the first set. The next set, they're going to be super simple. It's just these are ones you might end up mixing up. Okay, these are ones that kids struggled with more last year. So reflexive property is simply saying that something equals itself. Okay, so it's like saying x equals x. Well, we know that. Okay, but if that ever happened, we could use the reflexive property to prove that. Symmetric property is what allows me to flip the equal sign. So if I started with x equals 2, that's the same thing as saying 2 equals x. We know that's true, but you have to state the symmetric property for that. The next one is transitive, which says if a equals b and b equals c, then we know that a equals c. Okay, so all they did was say, okay, well, they're both equal to b, so then they have to be equal to each other. Substitution property, if I have something that looks like 2x plus 7 minus 4x equals 9x. Okay, if I have something that looks like that, but then I tell you that x equals 5. The substitution property says that everywhere I see that x, I can also put a 5 instead in order to solve. So if I know that two things are equal, I can interchange them in an equation. The distribution property, if I have 7 parentheses x plus 2 close parentheses, we know we can distribute that 7 and change it to 7x plus 14. All right, so that's distribution property. And then simplify is simply, the only time we use that is whenever we combine like terms. Okay, so if I have an equation that is 2x plus 7 minus 4x equals 9, and I want to take the 2x and the 4x and combine them and make it negative 2x plus 7 equals 9, that right there is where I would say that I simplified. Okay, that's probably the biggest ones that kids messed up last year, because in our heads, combining like terms is such a simple task that we don't have to say why we did it. We just do it. Well, when you're doing proofs, you have to say why you know you can do absolutely everything. Okay, so that right there is just the algebraic properties. Eventually we're going to go over some geometric ones, and we're going to start to do probably some 2-column proofs within the next few days that force you to use the algebraic properties and understand where they go. All right, so make sure that you wrote all that down. If I were you, I would put it in a chart like I did, because it makes it really easy for you to look and say, okay, this substitution property goes with this, distribution goes with this, okay, and everything's lined up nice and neat for you. That way, when we do start working on the worksheets, you don't have a problem with matching anything up. All right, so make sure you have that written down. If you got stuck, highlight it, circle it, put a star next to it. That way you remember to ask tomorrow, and we will start another activity tomorrow.